In the early months of 2024, a weathered cardboard container arrived at one of Boston's most prestigious historical institutions on a freezing Tuesday morning. Inside were 17 seemingly unremarkable items from a deceased collector's estate. Among faded tintypes and deteriorating cabinet cards sat what appeared to be just another Victorian family photograph. But this single image would soon reveal a secret that someone had tried desperately to bury for over a century. Rebecca Collins, a dedicated curator specializing in 19th century American photography, had been sorting through donations for hours. Her eyes were strained, her coffee had gone cold, and she was ready to call it a day. Then she pulled out an 8x10 portrait mounted on thick cream-colored cardstock. The embossed gold lettering at the bottom read, J. Morrison Studio, Boston, Massachusetts, 1892. She positioned the image beneath her magnifying lamp and leaned closer. 5 figures stared back at her with those rigid, unsmiling expressions so characteristic of that era. A bearded gentleman in his late 30s occupied an ornate wooden chair. A woman in a severe, high-necked dark dress stood beside him. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, were arranged around the adults with perfect Victorian precision. Rebecca had examined thousands of similar portraits throughout her career. They were silent windows into lives long concluded. Frozen moments paid for with precious savings by families desperate to preserve their legacy. Most told no stories beyond their careful composition. But something about this particular image made her pause. Something felt different. Something felt wrong. Rebecca adjusted her lamp and pressed her face closer to the photograph. The image quality was exceptional for its age, remarkably sharp. Despite more than 13 decades of existence, she could distinguish individual threads in the gentleman's wool suit, the intricate lacework adorning the woman's collar, even the tiny buttons fastening the children's garments. Then her gaze drifted downward toward the floor. Beside the carved leg of the ornate chair, there, partially concealed by a decorative rug's hem, lurked what she had initially dismissed as nothing more than a shadow. It was no shadow. Her breath caught in her throat, partially visible, almost deliberately tucked out of sight, was an object that had absolutely no business appearing in a formal Victorian portrait. Rebecca's hands began to tremble as she reached for her high-resolution digital scanner. She needed absolute certainty about what her eyes were telling her. The scanner hummed to life. Rebecca configured the resolution to 200 dots per inch, far beyond what typical archival work demanded. When the digital image loaded on her monitor, she zoomed directly to that suspicious area beside the chair. There, partially obscured by the decorative rug, in the chair's shadow, lay a small cloth doll. The toy was clearly handmade, roughly constructed with a simple dress and yarn serving as hair. The fabric showed obvious signs of wear, of being loved by small hands over many months. But what sent Rebecca's pulse racing wasn't the doll's existence. Such homemade toys were commonplace in the 1890s. What troubled her was its placement. Victorian. Portrait photography represented a significant financial investment. Families saved for months to afford a single sitting at a reputable studio. Every element was meticulously arranged. The furniture, the clothing, the posture, the lighting. When props appeared, they served deliberate purposes. A pocket watch to convey prosperity. A book to suggest education. A worn child's toy would never be carelessly abandoned on the floor of a formal portrait session. Never, unless someone specifically wanted it there. Rebecca examined hundreds of family portraits from the 1890s. Not a single one showed a toy casually placed on the studio floor. This doll had been deliberately positioned where it would barely register to casual observers present, but not obvious. Someone had wanted this toy documented while simultaneously attempting to minimize its prominence. The question burning in Rebecca's mind was simple. Why? The Boston City Archives occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in the historic North End. Rebecca arrived the moment the doors opened, armed with a photograph, her laptop, and a thermos of strong coffee. Within an hour, she located the Morrison Studios' 1892 appointment book. There it was, November 14th, 1892. Thomas and Elizabeth Harper. Family portrait. 5 subjects. Payment received in full. Rebecca now possessed identities for the man and woman in the photograph. But who were the 3 children? She relocated to the birth records section, pulling heavy volumes covering the years 1882 through 1890. After 2 exhausting hours of methodical searching, she found them. James Harper, born March 1884. Robert Harper, born June 1886. 2 sons, only 2. Rebecca sat back, her mind racing. The photograph unmistakably showed 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. But according to official birth records, Thomas and Elizabeth Harper had only 2 sons. There was no daughter, no 3rd child registered anywhere. She returned to the photograph, zooming in on the little girl's serious face. The child was undeniably present, her small hand held securely by Elizabeth Harper. Yet, according to every official document, this girl simply did not exist. Rebecca searched death records, marriage records, certificates, immigration logs, and census data. She discovered Thomas Harper listed in the 1890 census as a supervisor at the Waltham textile mill, residing at 47 Cedar Street with his wife and 2 sons. No daughter, no 3rd child, no explanation. Rebecca decided to investigate Thomas Harper's employment more thoroughly. Factory records often contain details that census data missed. The mill records were housed in a separate section. She requested every box covering 1888 to 1895. She found key Thomas Harper's employment file after an hour of searching. He had worked at the mill since 1881, advancing from floor worker to supervisor by 1889. Significant achievement that explained how the family could afford the formal portrait. Then, tucked between 2 quarterly reports from 1891, she found a newspaper clipping that made her hands still. Tragedy at Waltham Mill. 5 workers perish in a devastating boiler room blaze on January 18, 1891. A boiler malfunction had caused a catastrophic explosion, triggering a fire that spread rapidly through the lower floors. 5 workers had perished, trapped when a main stairwell collapsed. The article listed their names: Patrick Brennan, age 34, Michael Donovan, age 28, Catherine Riley, age 29, Sean Murphy, age 41, and Margaret Sullivan, age 27. The article described rescue efforts and praised several workers who had risked their lives. One name appeared multiple times: Thomas Harper, who had repeatedly entered the burning building to search for trapped workers. Near the end of the article, almost as an afterthought, appeared a brief mention: Mrs. Sullivan leaves behind a daughter, age 4, whose long-term situation remains uncertain. The child's father had died of pneumonia in 1889, leaving Mrs. Sullivan the sole support of her small family. Rebecca's mind connected pieces, scattered across 130 years. Margaret Sullivan, a textile worker and widow, had perished in the fire in January 1891, leaving behind a 4-year-old daughter with no known relatives. The Harper family photograph had been taken in November 1892. Nearly 2 years later, the little girl in the portrait appeared to be approximately 5 or 6 years old. The ages aligned perfectly. Rebecca dedicated her weekend to researching Margaret Sullivan. The tragedy had warranted coverage in multiple Boston newspapers, providing additional details. Margaret had been a widow for nearly 2 years before the fire claimed her life. Her husband had died of pneumonia in 1889. The couple had immigrated from Ireland. He had no remaining family in America. Margaret had worked the early morning shift starting at 5 o'clock, which explained why her daughter had not been with her during the fire. The articles mentioned that neighbors had cared for the child in the immediate aftermath, but none specified what happened long term. On Monday, Rebecca traveled to the Massachusetts State Archives to search orphanage records. Boston had several institutions that cared for children in the 1890s. If Margaret Sullivan's daughter had been placed in any official institution, there should be a record she worked through. Admission registers for January through December, 1,891. The names were heartbreaking. Dozens of children deposited by desperate parents or orphaned by disease and accident. But she found no admission matching Margaret Sullivan's daughter. Rebecca sat back, increasingly certain of what had happened. The child had not gone to an orphanage, because someone had taken her in privately. Someone who had been at the mill during the fire. Someone who felt responsible. Thomas Harper. She returned to the photograph with fresh eyes. The worn cloth doll beside the chair. Had Margaret Sullivan made it for her daughter? Was it the only possession the child carried from her old life into her new one? The placement made perfect sense. The Harpers had positioned it carefully, visible, but not prominent. They were acknowledging the truth of the child's origins while presenting her as their daughter. Rebecca needed proof beyond circumstantial evidence. She returned to the Boston Public Library and dug through school enrollment records for the Cedar Street area. She found what she was seeking in the records of the Cedar Street Primary School. Asterisk. The enrollment register for 1892 to 1893 listed 3 children from the Harper household. James Harper, age 8, Robert Harper, age 6, and Anna Harper, age 5. Anna Harper, a name that appeared nowhere in birth records, nowhere in census data prior to 1892. She had simply materialized in the Harper household. Thomas and Elizabeth Harper had taken in Margaret Sullivan's orphaned daughter after the fire. They had given her their family name. They had enrolled her in school as their daughter, and they had included her in their formal portrait, with only a small cloth doll to mark her true origin. Rebecca contacted the Waltham Historical Society, hoping to find context that documents could not provide. A volunteer coordinator named Dorothy invited her to visit their museum, which maintained oral history interviews recorded in the 1970s and 1980s with elderly residents who had grown up in the mill district. Rebecca drove to Waltham on a rainy Thursday morning. Dorothy, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and sharp eyes, led her to a room filled with transcripts. The 1891 fire left deep scars in this community, Dorothy explained. Many families lost someone that day. Rebecca spent hours reading through the transcripts. Then, in an interview from 1979 with a woman named Helen, born in 1895, said something remarkable in the interview. The Harpers lived 2 houses down from us on Cedar Street. Mr. Harper was well-liked, a fair supervisor. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. My mother told me the girl wasn't theirs by birth, but they loved her just the same. Mother, said Mrs. Harper's heart broke for the child. After her real mother died in the terrible fire, they took her in when others wouldn't, raised her as their own. Nobody talked about it openly. In those days, you didn't pry into such things, but everyone knew, and everyone respected them for it. Rebecca read the passage 3 times, her eyes burning with sudden emotion. The community had known Anna wasn't the Harpers' biological daughter, but they had protected the family's privacy. Dorothy examined the photograph Rebecca had brought, focusing on the cloth doll beside the chair. That's telling, Dorothy said softly. They didn't hide where she came from. They acknowledged it in their own way. That doll was probably the only thing she had left of her mother, and they let her keep it, armed with the name Anna and confirmation of her origins. Rebecca returned to Boston, determined to trace what had happened to the child after the photograph was taken. She started with the 1900 census. She found the Harper family still at 47 Cedar Street. Thomas, age 45, mill supervisor. Elizabeth, age 42. James, age 16. Robert, age 14. And Anna, age 13, listed simply as daughter. The 1910 census showed James and Robert had left home. Anna, now 23, was still living with Thomas and Elizabeth, working as a seamstress. Then Rebecca found Anna's marriage record. Anna Harper married Joseph Mitchell on June 12, 1912, at St. Mary's Church in Waltham. The record listed her father as Thomas Harper. No mention of her birth name. No reference to Margaret Sullivan. The Harpers had given this orphan child not just a home, but a complete identity. Rebecca continued searching. City directories showed Anna and Joseph living in Cambridge. Birth records revealed they had 4 children between 1913 and 1921. Anna appeared in the 1920, 1930, and 1940 census. Records, marriages, addresses, occupations, children. She found Anna's death certificate. In the records for 1967, she had passed at age 80. At her daughter's home in Arlington, Rebecca stared at the death certificate. Anna had lived 76 years after that photograph was taken. Raised by people who chose to love her. She had married, raised children, lived to see grandchildren. She had passed not as Margaret Sullivan's orphan daughter, but as Anna Harper Mitchell. Surrounded by family, Rebecca knew the story wasn't complete. If Anna had lived until 1967 and had 4 children, her descendants were likely still alive. They deserved to know the truth about their great-grandmother's origins. She started with Anna's obituary, which listed her surviving children, Catherine, Margaret, Thomas, and Elizabeth named. Rebecca realized with a catch in her breath, after the Harpers and Anna's birth mother, using genealogy, databases, and public records. Rebecca identified 6 of Anna's grandchildren, who were still living now in their 70s and 80s. She drafted a careful letter explaining who she was and describing the photograph she had found. 2 weeks later, she received a phone call from a woman named Patricia, Anna's granddaughter. "Your letter was quite a surprise," Patricia said. "I knew my grandmother was close to the Harper family, but I never understood the full connection." They arranged to meet. Patricia arrived, carrying a worn leather portfolio. "After I got your letter, I went through boxes my mother left me," Patricia said. "I found these." She laid out 3 items. A photograph of Anna on her wedding, in 1912. A handwritten letter from Anna to her daughter from 1935. And, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, a small cloth doll with yarn hair. Rebecca's breath caught. "My grandmother kept it her entire life," Patricia said softly. "When I was a child, I asked her about it. She said it was very special, that it had belonged to someone she loved very much." Rebecca showed Patricia the scanned portrait, zooming in on the doll beside the chair. Patricia leaned close, comparing the doll in the photograph to the one on the table. They were identical, the same construction, the same yarn hair, even the same small tear in the fabric. "My God," Patricia whispered. "She kept it all those years, from the photograph until the day she passed." Rebecca told her everything: the fire, Margaret Sullivan, Thomas Harper's rescue efforts, and the informal adoption. Patricia listened with tears streaming down her face. She was loved, Patricia said quietly, by 2 families. By her birth mother, who made this doll for her, and by the Harpers, who gave her everything else. Patricia called a family meeting, inviting all of Anna's living descendants. 17 people gathered at her home: grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Rebecca presented her findings, displaying the 1892 Harper family portrait on a large screen. She zoomed in on the cloth doll, then revealed the actual doll Patricia had preserved. Gasps rippled through the room. She walked them through everything: the rescue efforts, Thomas Harper's heroic role, the appearance of Anna in the Harper household, and the photograph that documented her new family. Thomas and Elizabeth Harper took her in privately. Rebecca explained, "This wasn't legal adoption. Those were rare and expensive in the 1890s. They simply brought her into their home and raised her as their daughter. The community knew, but they protected the family's privacy. An elderly man raised his hand. Did she know? Did my grandmother know she was adopted? Rebecca hesitated. Based on the evidence, I believe she did. The fact that she kept the doll her entire life suggests she remembered her birth mother. But in the 1890s, such things weren't discussed openly. She was raised as a Harper, and that became her identity. Tricia stood and carefully held up the cloth doll. This is what my grandmother carried from one life into another. Her birth mother made this for her. The Harpers let her keep it, and she carried their love too, treasured it for 76 years. The presentation ended with embraces, tears, and long conversations that stretched into the evening. Family members who had known Anna shared memories, her kindness, her strength, her quiet dignity. Rebecca returned to the Boston Historical Society with a profound sense of completion. She prepared a detailed archival report documenting everything she had discovered. With Patricia's permission, she had the cloth doll professionally photographed, creating a companion exhibit to the family portrait. The two artifacts would be displayed together, connected by the story of Anna Sullivan Harper Mitchell. The exhibit opened 3 months later, titled Beside the Chair, One Family's Act of Compassion. It featured the Harper family portrait enlarged to show every detail, with the worn cloth doll displayed in a case nearby. Patricia and several descendants attended the opening. They stood together in front of the photograph, studying the faces of Thomas, Elizabeth, James, Robert, and 5-year-old Anna. They looked so serious. One great-grandchild observed. Patricia nodded. Maybe they knew how important this moment was. This photograph is proof, she said. Proof that she belonged, that she was part of the family. And that doll beside the chair is proof of where she came from, that her first mother loved her too. Rebecca stood nearby, thinking about all the photographs filling archives around the world. How many held stories like this one? How many documented quiet acts of heroism that left only the faintest traces? The Harper family portrait was not remarkable because of its composition. It was remarkable because of what it preserved evidence of a choice. Thomas and Elizabeth Harper could have done nothing. Instead, they opened their home and hearts, accepting the challenge of raising another child as their own, Anna. The orphan daughter of a textile worker who perished in a fire had lived a full life because of that choice. She had been loved twice, once by the mother who made her a doll, and again by the family who let her keep it, the worn cloth doll, barely visible beside the chair in that formal Victorian portrait, had revealed its secret after 132 years. Sometimes the smallest details hold the largest. Truths in ordinary people, in extraordinary moments, can change the course of history, one rescued child at a time.